Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Hellstone here again, and today I am very excited because we are going to be continuing with our theme of World War I. Last time, if you haven't seen, I checked out a video about the British infantry and how they evolved during the First World War. Today, we're going to be moving on to the French. Now, I haven't put out any content so far about the French army. However, I absolutely love the French army, their military history. Now, to give you a little background, if you're new to my channel and you don't know about me, I am a student of military history currently at university. I'm also a member of the National Guard. I love learning about militaries throughout history, especially other countries' militaries, as well as my own. But I'm excited to learn more about this. If you haven't, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me out an absolute ton. But without further ado, let's hop into the video.
In the public mind, the First World War is often seen as narrow-minded or stubborn officers sending wave after wave of men to die going over the top from the trenches. In reality, the war saw the nations fighting it undergo the most profound and radical military revolution in their histories. We've looked at several of these so far, and today I'm going to look at France. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to a Great War special episode about the evolution of French infantry doctrine during the First World War. To look at that, though, you really have to go back to France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 and 1871. French leadership saw the defeat as an intellectual one. The Prussian High Command had given its officers a greater sense of purpose and tactical flexibility, and that army overwhelmed a French one that was not only underprepared, but had no clarity of objectives or united leadership. The Third French Republic completely overhauled the military, and after 9 years of reforms, the French War Academy was founded. Garrison libraries were instituted in 1871 to promote intellectualism and initiative. There would be 200 by 1914. Soon, each branch of service had a monthly magazine. Officers of all ranks were expected to hold conferences and write essays. The mobilization that had been chaotic became thoroughly planned, and the railway networks that had been poorly exploited were expanded and fully integrated. But the French leadership overemphasized what it saw as its flaws or the enemy's virtues. The defensive stance, the passivity, and the belief in superior equipment of 1870 became anathema. Even the adoption of the Lebel smokeless rifle in 1886 that guaranteed accurate and lethal fire on an individual level did not shake off the anti-materialism of the new generation of graduated officers. The concept of leadership capable of leading the troops to victory by superior morale became widespread, and the solution to the lethality of the modern battlefield was simply French élan. Now, the German military did not share this anti-materialism, having drawn the correct lessons from 1870 and 1871. The British and the Russians had, by 1914, benefited from the lessons of the Boer Wars and the Russo-Japanese War. France, of course, took lessons away as well, particularly those of artillery and concealment, but the lack of practical experience and centralized leadership delayed implementation. By 1914, Germany had a huge advantage over France in artillery and machine guns, and also in manpower, having outgrown France enormously over the past 3 decades.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting, and one thing that I do like to point out, and one thing that I always like to emphasize whenever I study any sort of military history, is I look at the officer corps and see how they influence the regular army, and of course that interests me because currently I'm going through officer training, and I'll be an officer in a couple more years, and it is very interesting just how big of an influence the officer corps and the leadership, I guess, in general can have on the soldiers. And you can have like the best equipment, you can have the best morale, you can have everything, but at the end of the day, the leadership is going to either make or break an army. And I don't know, I just think that's pretty interesting.
To French commander Joseph Joffrey, training always toward offense was the answer, which is sort of the opposite of the trench war that was coming. It is not in the excess of cautiousness that we must search safety, but rather in the disposition of our troops in a way that always guarantee our combat readiness. The real defense of a marching column lies in its ability to launch an immediate counterattack. While this understanding of modern war is erroneous, it does contradict the idea that France entered the war without a doctrine that was, in its context, coherent. The first hostilities of 1914 quickly revealed the flaws of the system. On August 14th, for example, near Plan, repeated bayonet frontal assaults were shattered by German machine guns and artillery, while that same day, 2 batteries of 75mm field guns disregarded the rules and made a joint action with the infantry, a fixation barrage without flanking movements that forced a German withdrawal. For the rest of 1914, the French army was forced to hugely adapt and evolve. Over 40% of the commanders of large units were removed for incompetence or insufficiency during this time.
Wow, 40%. That's a massive amount. Like, there's no other way to put it. That's crazy. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is it really does come down to the leadership.
And already in August, General Headquarters issued notes based on battle reports. Conquered territory must be manned and defended with artillery to prevent counterattacks. The enemy must first be engaged with skirmishers and artillery before the main assault. The infantry must wait for artillery support. Do not let the troops needlessly expose themselves. There were more of these, and in early September, new instructions were issued about building trenches. However, even though French leadership had now realized that firepower kills, assimilating this was a work in progress, and it was tough to overcome the damage done by pre-war military education. General Fayolle wrote in January 1915, "I'm having a lot of difficulties trying to organize the construction of trenches by the troops. My men are more interested in dying than working." He wrote in December that year, "The truth is that nobody was prepared for this war of positions. We all had the greatest disdain for fortifications and entrenching works. Our whole education had to be reworked. War cannot be improvised." The northeastern part of the country was occupied, and France had lost 60% of its coal and iron mines. So 1915 was a year of frantic reforms aimed at replenishing worn-out artillery, depleted ammunition stores, and the nation's crippled heavy industry. Still, Joffrey launched 2 major offensives to draw German divisions away from Russia and to experiment with new ways of using artillery. They really also tried to teach the lessons of 1914. Wounded veterans replaced military instructors, and dedicated instruction centers were created. The offensives were really the...
Real quick, I like that idea of the wounded veterans becoming the instructors, because my instructors currently that are teaching me are all incredibly experienced enlisted men and officers, and the education that I'm getting from them is just absolutely outstanding. And so it just makes sense that somebody who had been out in the type of war that they were fighting at the time would be the ones teaching the new soldiers and officers how they would be fighting. That just makes sense.
Swan song, with a few exceptions, of the old style of leadership, since the expected breakthroughs never came. Fayolle again. "Our magnificent infantry was broken by barbed wires and entrenched artillery. Our soldiers demand new combat methods and more combat weaponry." But new armament programs, organizational reforms, and troop instruction took time. And it was only in late 1915 and 1916 that the French army was again really innovating. That period saw all sorts of material upgrades, from the Adrian helmet to the Chauchat light machine gun, grenade launchers, even the wheeled field kitchen. The French leadership devised new doctrines for methodical battle, with cooperation between infantry and artillery, and the primacy of material over men. The shackles of 1871 had finally been broken, and the dramatic increase of firepower at the divisional level and enthusiasm for experimentation would be instrumental in turning the tide at the Battle of Verdun. Local superiority in material, a rolling artillery barrage, and a thoroughly trained and equipped infantry would propel Robert Nivelle from success at Verdun all the way to Chief of Staff, replacing Joffrey in December 1916. He began the modernization process that would ultimately lead to the creation of the modern French army. But though the men were trained to fight within a system and the branches coordinated actions, his strategy was flawed, as the speed of the infantry was subordinated to the artillery, which could only keep up as preparation allowed. So when Nivelle attacked on a large front with unlimited objectives, especially against the new German defenses, the Hindenburg Line, it was a catastrophe made worse by Nivelle's refusal to call it off for weeks. So Nivelle was out and Philippe Pétain was in. Finally, a true, convinced modernist who had been in favor of modern methods since well before the war, He implemented a second rearmament program to give the Army Renault FT tanks, infantry trucks, more planes, but more importantly, the logistical means to properly exploit a breakthrough of the German elastic defenses once the critical mass of material required had been secured.
And that's just such an important part. You have to learn to adapt to new types of warfare. If you try to fight a current war the same way that the last war was fought, usually it doesn't end up going well for you. So that is very important.
Two conditions were necessary to bring about a war of movement in the Allies' favor: guaranteed local superiority in both firepower and manpower, and the motorization of the infantry and artillery to keep the initiative during exploitation before German reinforcements could arrive by rail. This methodology worked well in limited offensives like the Second Battle of Verdun and the Battle of Malmaison. And really, for the first time in the war, the French army was truly playing in the same league as its adversary. They now understood both German defense in depth and infiltration tactics. However, the disaster that hit the Italians at Caporetto and Russia leaving the war forced the Entente to concede the initiative to the Central Powers, and as 1918 began, they prepared for the inevitable onslaught. If they could withstand the storm long enough for the French armament program and the arriving American troops to give them their two conditions, they could win a war of movement through logistical superiority. Germany relied increasingly on shock troops. Pétain and Ferdinand Foch thought this indicated a lack of confidence in the regular infantry, whether or not true. French high command debated something similar, but decided instead to further the integration of different branches into a coherent, inter-armed fighting force, and the French modern infantry was born. Still, the first half of 1918 would see the army reel under German attacks. It's difficult to unlearn 3 years of offensive trench warfare. But you could see the Fourth Army of General Gouraud that diligently applied Pétain's directives held its ground. And by the summer, the troops embraced battle-proven concepts. Let's see, Mangin's counterattack at Metz, June 11th, for example, supported by masses of tanks and planes, just lay waste to the German advance. Massive motorization and extensive and well-maintained roads allowed France strategic deployment that Germany just could not keep up with. In fact, German Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff claimed, "The Entente victory of 1918 is the triumph of French trucks over the German railway." By August 1918, after 4 years of bloody war, the French army was the most modern fighting force in the world, with a highly motorized infantry supported by 2,300 tanks, 3,800 planes, and over 10,000 artillery pieces. 1914 had been completely reversed, and the victories of 1918 were performed by Allied troops sharing a cohesive training and a logistical organization. Big thanks to...
Alrighty, I think this is the end of the video, so let's talk about this briefly. Alrighty, so I really enjoyed that video. Like I said, this is, I think, the first real video that I've put out on the French army, and I was excited to watch this because, at least here in America, I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the world, the French get a bad rap for their military, and there's a lot of surrendering jokes that go around, but obviously very untrue. And historically speaking, the French military is the most successful military in history, followed by the United Kingdom and then the United States after that. And so learning about what their involvement was in the First World War was really fun for me, and I really enjoyed it. Now, I do plan on putting out videos about all the other armies involved in the First World War in the coming days and weeks, and it should be a lot of fun. Now, of course, huge respect to the French army. Always appreciate them. Of course, they helped us out in our revolution and during both the wars, so it's great stuff. They definitely helped train us American troops when we entered the First World War, and I'll certainly put a video out about the doughboys who entered the First World War, but I think this will be it for today. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next time.